Great. Welcome, everybody. We will call to order the City of Ferndale Planning Commission meeting for Wednesday, April 4th, 2018 at 6:33 p.m. And we will begin with a roll call.
Commissioners Goering,
Here.
Azar, Martin,
Here.
Brazen, Williamson,
Here.
Farr,
Here.
Cassio,
Here.
and Baker.
Here. And Commissioners Azar and Brazen let us know in advance that they would not be available. Is there a motion to approve their absence?
Move to approve their absences.
Thank you.
Support.
Thank you. That was a motion by our Vice Chairman Farr and our Commissioner Williamson. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. That motion passes. We will now move on to the approval of the agenda. Are there any additions or changes to the agenda from staff or commission tonight?
I move to accept the agenda as presented. Second.
Thank you. That motion was made by Councilman Martin with a second by Commissioner Farr. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you very much. That motion passes. We'll now move on to the approval of the minutes. We had an email earlier today. I think there was some difficulty attaching the minutes to the online packet. Did everyone have a chance to take a look at the minutes from our February 21 meeting? Are there any edits, changes, additions?
I move we accept the minutes. Second.
Thank you. That was a motion by Councilman Martin with a second by Commissioner Cassio. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
I'm going to abstain as I didn't have an opportunity to review the minutes.
It's an abstention from Farr and Williamson. Does that mean we'll need to come back and do it, pass it at the next meeting? Or do we got quorum to pass it?
Oh, yeah.
Would you rather do a roll call than a voice vote?
We could do that.
Okay.
Want to do that instead?
We'll go back and do a roll call on that one. Again, that was a motion by Councilman Martin with a second by Commissioner Cassio. And we'll do a roll call vote. We may need to approve those at the next meeting.
Commissioners Cassio,
Yes.
Goering,
Yes.
Williamson,
Abstain.
Farr,
Abstain.
who else is there?
Martin.
Martin,
Yes.
and Baker.
Yes. That motion does not pass. We will need to come back and pass that at the next meeting. Thank you. All right, next is our call to audience. This is a chance for anyone in the audience to address the commission on anything that's not on the agenda. You're welcome to address the commission on anything. Tonight we'll be talking about the revised concept site plan for Ferndale House on 9 Mile. And we'll also be getting an update from our city staff on approved and pending housing developments in the city of Ferndale. But anyone in the audience is welcome to take 3 minutes to address us on anything else. Welcome. Come on. I thought we might have had a few walk in.
Yep.
Welcome.
Hi, Leah Ducey. I live on West Marshall.
Hi, Leah.
I'm speaking today on the Pinecrest Holdings development that was on the agenda for last week. I was actually here in attendance, but I had a strict 8:45 leaving time cutoff, so after the nearly 2 hours of lawyer speak on marijuana, I didn't get a chance to talk to you guys.
We did enter your comments into the record, though. You had a neighbor
Okay.
who read everything, so I wanna
Okay.
make sure you knew.
So,
It was not voted on.
It wasn't voted on? Oh, I'm so sorry, Leah. This won't take your time. I just want to make sure I understand what the clerk's
You have to
telling
vote
us.
on that to enter that into the minutes. For
But
attachment.
will it be recorded for next time?
If I get a clean copy,
Interesting.
yeah.
okay.
You would have to
Well,
vote to
I'll
enter.
just let you know that I have a slightly revised statement for today,
Thank
so
you.
it won't be
Wonderful.
exactly the same anyways. It should be pretty quick and boring because I plan to just read it to you guys, and then I can also turn over this paper. I don't know if that's helpful for adding it to the record. I don't know.
Yes, and that's what we had your neighbor do last time, so that's perfect.
Okay.
Thank you.
So, just want to start off by saying that it's my opinion that the site plan that was presented by Pinecrest Holdings LLC on March 21st, 2018 for the proposed development of a PUD on the former Ethel Corporation industrial site does not meet the qualifying conditions for a PUD as set forth in the Ferndale City Code of Ordinances, in that it doesn't meet the first two conditions. It's my opinion that the PUD has not been planned and developed as a cohesive project. The PUD is not compatible with the overall goals and recommendations of in the City of Ferndale Master Plan. I'll elaborate on that. The site plan as presented includes one full parcel and only a portion of the southern parcel on 8 Mile. I think that subdividing the second parcel and presenting a PUD for consideration without providing site plans for additional phases in the entirety of the second parcel does not constitute a comprehensive development. Also, the site plan as presented includes only residential land uses, while the 2017 master plan update identifies the site as a key redevelopment site for future mixed-use development. I would like to see a comprehensive PUD site plan showing all phases of development, including mixed use and commercial development, before the Planning Commission proceeds with approval. The preliminary PUD plan as presented also lacked a description of how the proposed PUD will result in recognizable and substantial benefits to the city that would not be available under the underlying zoning district as required in Article 13, Section 24-305. Additionally, I'd like to call attention to the concrete greenway connector included in the site plan between the sidewalk and the street, and mention that Pinecrest is a bike route and that sidewalks are required in this area per city ordinance. So I personally see no additional benefit to a third concrete path running adjacent to the two existing paths, and I don't believe that this provides any additional connectivity or multimodal transit benefits. I haven't heard any of my fellow citizens speak in favor of the concrete corridor, so I'm not sure why that's included. And if that's to be considered a community benefit, I just wanted on record that I haven't heard anyone in the community seeing that as a benefit. And then pretty close to lastly here, I understand that one of my neighbors was able to relay my main request at the last meeting, which is that I'm requesting that the city assemble a sort of redevelopment task force for ongoing discussion of the future of this site. I understand that the response was that a task force is not applicable for this site because it's private property. I just want to enter into the record that respectfully I disagree. I can't find any regulations in our city charter prohibiting the Planning Commission or city staff from convening a voluntary committee and inviting additional parties such as the landowner or potential developer to participate. So if you have them, please let me know where that, where we're prohibited from that. And then, very lastly, since the developer intends to request PUD approval as well as brownfield funds for this site, I just want to reiterate that I really feel a task force or a special committee, including citizens, is appropriate. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thanks, Leah. Anyone else for called audience? Welcome.
Hello.
Hello.
My name is Sarah Cleaver. I want to say thank you for the last meeting 2 weeks ago. You guys were here so long. I don't know how you do it sometimes. But thank you, and thank you for echoing our concerns. Really appreciate it, and the community really responded well. A couple of follow-up questions to what was discussed that evening. The developer did make a statement saying that former Superintendent Blake Pruitt had made a statement that the schools could in fact handle the potential influx of families and new students. My clarification that I'd like to hear, though, is that implied with the buildings we already have, or is it possible that we'll be seeing a new school built in the future to be able to handle this? And if so, how do we as a community reconcile that with tearing down schools that we've already put money in, a bond that's still being paid on for buildings that no longer exist? Also, something that came up in discussions in development, in regards to development, is how protected are our parks? Will any of our parks be developed in the future? And if so, what does it mean? What parks will be developed? And how much are we looking into nonprofit development? And looking at this, it seems that we have a lot of development that's just kind of making money for the developer. It's good for a community overall, but the developer takes the money home. And when we have nonprofit development, that money gets reinvested in our community and surrounding communities and is helpful more so overall, I feel. So those are the things I wanted to address this evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments? Welcome. Welcome back.
Hello.
Hello.
Al Benchich. I live at 1437 West Marshall. Had a couple questions and just a brief statement. I'm trying to understand the rationale for density. It's increasing the density. We have to increase the density, which means smaller footprint, of property with larger homes on it. Who benefits from that? Is it just the builder because they're able to build more houses, sell more houses on the same amount of property than they would have otherwise? How do we as the community benefit? Because you put more strain on the structure. I moved here 2.5 years ago because I like this small town. It's a small town, 4 square miles, and I thought the density was just fine. And the more you increase the density, the harder it is to park, the harder it is to do a lot of different things. So I'm trying to understand that rationale. And secondly, is one of the rationales used to give a PUD is that the project have some kind of innovative aspect to it? All the housing developments I'm seeing here could go up in Novi or Sterling Heights or anywhere. I don't see any innovation. I mean, I've been looking at the master plan, and I was thinking Ferndale's like a progressive town that tries to do things in a different way. I don't see any low or moderate income housing. It's all going to be in the upper $300,000. I don't see any kind of innovation that we're going to try to be more inclusive, to bring other folks in, or do things with the available open land, which is getting less and less and less as we progress here. Things that will benefit the community. And I think that's what we should be doing when we do community development. How do we benefit the community, not just the developers? Thank you.
Thanks, Al. Welcome, Janet.
Thank you. Good evening. I'm Janet Norwich, 706 Pinecrest. As a follow-up to the previous questions and comments that were made, I'd like this Plan Commission to know that at the time of the Reichhold cleanup and redevelopment, we did have a neighborhood advisory committee that was formed, and it included members of the public, as well as Reichhold's environmental consultants. And Reichhold was required to report the meeting minutes to the DEQ. And that worked fairly well, but at the time, we had input from U of D architectural students that provided 3 proposals for possible reuse of the site. And though Reichhold was willing to consider that kind of proposal, the city was not prepared to deal with it. As a consequence, we ended up with the self-storage facility when we could have had something that would have been much more beneficial to the city as a whole. So I'd like to caution you that it is possible to do that, and that as a resident, I would like the city to take an active role in looking at possible PUD development that the city would like to see happen, and not just the developer who has purchased this parcel. In addition, I noticed that the sign on 8 Mile Road in Pinecrest that this parcel is for sale is still up. And my concern is, why? Does the developer intend to sell off the front portion of the site if the housing goes up? And to whom does he intend to sell it? And I know we had a discussion, comments about possible reuses, but it was all up in the air, and there was no specific proposal that was brought forward. I'm also noticing that, and I appreciate it, that fencing screening has gone up over the parking lot where the construction staging is taking place, equipment storage and material storage. But the debris piles are still clearly visible from 8 Mile Road, the huge concrete piles. And I would like to see that covered as well to prevent dust from blowing. And I think that is state regulation, if not city regulation, that covering should be provided. And I would like to see those piles removed properly and disposed of properly as soon as possible. I know the developer claimed he's not responsible for those piles because he didn't create them, but he purchased the site. And so if he's unwilling to pay the expense of removing the piles, perhaps you could, as a city, require the former scrapper who took down all of the buildings on that site to follow through and actually remove those piles from the site. And that's all of my comments for this evening. I do plan to get over to the library, and I appreciate the fact that the materials requested at the last Plan Commission meeting are now available in the library for review. Thanks.
Thank you, Janet. Anyone else here for public comment on anything that is not on the agenda? Alrighty. There are a couple, if my fellow commissioners agree, there are at least a couple of things that I think we can work to answer, and then there are probably a couple of things that the city can answer. I don't like to leave questions just sort of hanging in the ether. Although I'm not the developer, so there's a few things I can't answer, including about whether the property is for sale. I don't know if you know that, Jordan. But starting with Leah's comments, including many of which the commission agrees with, and we talked about both presenting a comprehensive, or at least a more comprehensive plan for the whole site, which would include really the majority of anything that would be considered mixed use would be in that second piece, and so that's a really important part of the conversation with the developers in terms of that sort of concrete corridor. And I think that you and I had even had a conversation, the library maybe? I don't remember where. I swear we had a conversation about that corridor effectively sort of being a double dip. Like, you can't say that this is your set aside when it's already in an easement. Am I imagining that, or did we talk about that? Did you? I swear I thought I had that conversation with Leah, but I'm maybe completely imagining it, that, you know, you've got an easement right here. You can't say that this is your green space requirement for a PUD, right? So that was conveyed loud and clear to the developers, and Jordan is now working with them on some of the nature preserve and other suggestions that were raised by the neighbors in terms of, if you're going to preserve areas, how do you make sure that they're accessible to the community so that people can use them and enjoy them in terms of the stands of old growth trees. And so that came through loud and clear, and the developers are working on it. In terms of the task force, I guess I'm not entirely sure how to answer you. There may not be anything prohibiting it, but I looked to the two attorneys on the Planning Commission in terms of any ability to compel a private developer to, yes, they are accepting brownfield money. This is a PUD process. There's a certain amount of conversation and leverage that we have around those pieces. But I would hesitate to, I guess I'll kick it back to the city, form some sort of task force on a property that we don't own. Sure. If the conversations around parking and other things, or working with business owners in the M1 districts to talk about those zoning ordinance updates, those were things that the city ultimately had more control over the outcome of. So,
yeah, I can. You want me to
sure,
yeah.
please.
Through the chair, I can definitely speak to some of those. We did, following the Planning Commission meeting on the 21st, we basically sent a communication to the developers, sort of clarifying the expectations related to what they're calling Phase 1 and Phase 2, in terms of there were very, very specific tweaks that needed to be made to the Phase 1. Again, I'll put the air quotes around Phase 1 because that's their terminology, but the Phase 1 concept had very specific changes that needed to be made. We enumerated those changes and expected them to basically respond in terms of, either are you going to do this or is it not going to be acceptable, basically. On phase 2, again, basically we laid out some recommended next steps in terms of beginning to flesh that out and prepare it for further discussion. As far as like the task force, we'll basically defer to the direction of the commission. However, I'll stick my neck out and I'll say I agree, Madam Chair, with your perspective in terms of while we might not be able to compel the creation of a task force, that being said, I think staff sort of hears the spirit of that ask loud and clear. And so one of the other directives that the commission gave, which we agree with on the staff side, is sort of formulation of a more concrete, not only a communications plan, but like what is the process and where the heck is this thing going? We have laid out what we think is a recommended path. What our process as staff is, we spat that back to the developers this week. And then what we're asking, well, once we are understanding of their intent to proceed and what direction they wish to take with the instructions they were given, we want to give that to the commission. And if we feel that, okay, that has satisfied the direction that we're looking for, our goal is to have, we've tentatively set, and obviously we have an email list going, we're going to be reaching out to residents, tentatively set a meeting for April 25th, I think, or was it 26th? 25th. We've got 2 big community meetings coming up, one for Livernois and one for this. I believe it's the 25th. Obviously, we're going to give people plenty of notice for that, and that will be sort of an update of here's all the dialogue since the 21st, here's what's happening next, and here's how this could unfold. Because particularly with phase 2, there could be multiple scenarios that occur. One of the things that Leah spoke to very well in terms of like the conditions of a PUD. There are certain leverage that we do have and we don't have if that PUD process is in place. If they do not go with a PUD and they go with the underlining zoning, we have no ability to enforce any kind of preservation of trees. All we can do per ordinance is require the planting of new ones. So there's a finite amount of leverage that we have if we go the PUD route. And that's sort of something the developers have pushed in terms of their preferred method. That being said, we took the feedback very seriously in terms of strengthening the public benefit, sort of eliminating the double dip on the greenway, more clearly articulating, how are you accessing these public spaces like you spoke about, Chair. So essentially, just kind of wrap up, basically that process is in place. We plan on fully sort of, our goal was to basically get commission something to react to this week. After the developers had a chance to digest, especially what we sort of articulated here was the expected direction, making sure they're on board with that in terms of what their response is, communicating that to you, then communicating that out once we have sort of all the ducks in a row. But obviously this thing's not going to get approved without further discussion and vetting by both the public and this commission. So basically what I would want residents to know is we're basically going to be communicating out information well in advance. We have a project site in development on the website that we're going to be launching very soon, if it's not already up, in terms of just like an electronic collection place in addition to the public library where all this information will live. Opportunities at every meeting to kind of, if you're not already getting the emails, to get on that chain, and then obviously the required mailings that will occur, the sort of snail mail option. So we're rolling that out. We're going to incorporate the public as best we can in terms of obviously collecting that input, but I will reiterate that we've heard the comments to date loud and clear, and if a PUD process is what they go through, they're not going to get an approval and they're not going to get a staff recommendation unless they incorporate those comments in a way that works.
Sarah had a question about the schools. I know that you were following up with
the
superintendent.
I did. I got an email, and I can put it in. I can ask them to put it in letterhead if that's something that'd be preferred.
Please.
But okay, Superintendent Bazzi did say that they have existing capacity right now to handle not only the students that are there right now, but also any influx that would be created from this development. So I'll ask her to put that sort of on letterhead. She gave me a written statement from the school district in an email. And so, because we knew that was a big concern point, and frankly, staff wanted to know as well. That was something we weren't really involved in the decisions surrounding the Taft and Wilson sites. This one sort of, we wanted to have that answer kind of going into this process. So we have that. I will get that. I will ask the superintendent to put that sort of on letterhead as like a formal submittal. But they did state in writing that they can, and in fact, they support the project.
Got it. So. And then in terms of nonprofit development, there was also a question. I know that in addition to the Housing Commission, which we were talking about earlier, there's a major nonprofit developer working on one of our school sites. It just happens to be in Oak Park. But I know that you do work with nonprofit developers fairly regularly and are seeking them out in order to increase the diversity of housing options and price points.
Right. There are definitely several that we've engaged on different sites. I mean, one of the things, and I know that this is sort of a tension point, one of the things that those types of developers, and there's, I'll name a few that I've talked to, just there's some locally, there's some sort of nationally, like Full Circle out of Chicago, there's Community Housing Network that's here in the metro area, and then obviously Oakland Housing, and some of the feedback just generally that we get from these organizations is that they require density. They require a certain unit count to get to a level of affordability. And so that's one of the drivers of why density is a thing, to use a technical term, is essentially the economics of being able to provide affordable units. The more you can provide on the same space, the less you have to charge for those. That being said, I mean, I understand that that's sort of a give and take conversation in terms of how much density is healthy for a specific area. And so staff is looking at that very closely. But yes, we are talking to those housing providers and seeing, are there ways to strengthen community benefit? And frankly, that's a conversation that I think will have a very potent relevance to Phase 2, considering what's been talked about for that.
And I think Al is the first neighbor that I've heard, and I wasn't at the city council hearings on this, but encourage more sort of moderate income housing and workforce housing. So I wondered, one of the reasons you're talking to nonprofit housing developers is because of the city's new ordinance requiring that if you get city money, you need to build moderate and low income housing as a part of your development. So would you just speak to that?
Absolutely, yeah, thank you. Absolutely, that we did adopt an inclusionary housing policy, mirrored largely over what Detroit does, sort of in any project 25 units or more. It's sort of agnostic on whether that's rental or owner occupied. You would have to provide a 25% set aside. And I apologize, I forget the exact split, but essentially that 25% is split. Some of that is for folks who are at 80% or less area median income. Some is for 60%. Some is for 50%. I want to say it's somewhere in the neighborhood of like a 20, 10, and 10 split. I apologize, 20, 10, and 5, something like that. But it's a mix of incomes is the point. One of the things that, and we've actually pressed the developers themselves on this as well, in addition to talking to other parties, recognizing they own the site, so obviously, and they're the ones that have an application before us, but we've pressed them on different options, and they've expressed a written and a public commitment to work with us on a solution that makes sense for owner-occupied, which is admittedly a trickier space. That being said, we have some, what we think at least, are some pretty innovative ideas, building off the fact that they offered up that these houses, upon request, can be made barrier-free, or there's environmental sustainability principles that can be applied to those. So we're looking at ways, well, maybe those amenities, those extras can be subsidized so that if you're in that AMI category, those packages can be brought to you and it's not an extra cost burden. So we're looking at ways to make this an affordable project. Again, that's one where, and we're going to incorporate it as best we can with the leverage in the situation that we have for Phase 1. I think that there is a very strong potency for that on Phase 2, considering the nature of the conversation around that site, which is mixed use, rental properties, and some owner-occupied, but more of a mix of uses. And the inclusionary housing policies that we've seen out there so far tend to focus on rental properties. That being said, there's solutions beyond subsidy of housing that can affect affordability, and that we're also looking very closely at.
Thank you. And I know you supervise the code enforcement team, so you've heard Janet's concerns about the site?
Yes.
About debris and removal of debris or covering of debris
Yes.
to deal with dust, as well as that fencing that keeps falling apart. And so I'm glad they restored some fencing. There is one question that I know how to answer, and that has to do with parks being developed, because the city has for well longer than I've been at this table, has had a very strict ordinance about not selling park property. So there's a legal city restriction on selling park property for any reason, including development, if it is not replaced in kind somewhere else. So you can't. There have been all sorts of conversations over many years. How do we chop off the end of this park and we'll replace it over here? And it's like the city is very much against breaking up and selling parks, and that is codified.
If I may add to that, I couldn't agree more. There's nobody I know on council or otherwise that would support developing a park, and we do have very strict ordinances about replacing any parkland with additional parkland, so we should never shrink below our current footprint of parkland as it exists today.
That's the best I've got for answers.
What's that?
So I think that's the best I've got for answers.
No, that's good, but I would also add we just passed a bond and have a very definitive grant and pursuit and improvement schedule with the bonds that we just passed. So I would add the layer to that we certainly wouldn't develop any parks that we're investing so much money in to improve right now. It's just not anything that's would even approach our radar. So
Yeah, the city has, at least over the 10 years that I've been involved in one way or another, actually rejected several proposals to break up and sell Pintail Parkway. So those are, like I said, I don't like to leave questions hanging. I don't always psychically have an answer to everything that comes at public comment, but I knew that we could address a few, and that you've got not only Jordan, who's our Director of Community and Economic Development, but Aaron, who's working directly on this project and is sort of our environmental sustainability planner and expert here tonight. So they've taken all of this on board. They'll be able to get some further answers, and we'll just keep working toward the best solution we can.
Through the chair, just
Please.
a point of clarification. The inclusionary housing ordinance, that does not address brownfield development.
Oh,
Is that correct?
Great question. Actually, the triggers for it are anything that's on publicly owned land or incentivized. I wish Dan and Chris were here to specify this, but maybe I'll defer to the attorneys. We're sort of prevented by state law from requiring these kind of things on anything other than those two conditions. We either it's either got to be public land or it's got to be incentivized. So a brownfield would be susceptible to this.
Did that answer your question, Al? Did that answer your question?
Yes.
Got it. All right. Thank you. We'll move on to. Keep moving this so I don't breathe into it. We will move on to item number 5. We have a discussion item this evening. This is a revised site plan for Ferndale House, 430 West 9 Mile. Did Commissioner Azar reach out to either of you guys with a question? Wonderful.
She did.
Great.
She had
Okay.
some feedback, and
Perfect.
I can get into that when we get into the details.
Yep,
But I
will let
really
you-
appreciated that.
Yep, I'll let you make an introduction, and then we will hear from our applicant.
Awesome, thank you. So as you saw in your packet, essentially what you have before you are some proposed changes to the site plan for Ferndale House, which originally was approved in May of 2016. It's under construction, and one of the things that essentially there are a series of changes that the developers are going to ask to kind of consider and seek direction on. There are sort of in response to the changes to form-based code, downtown zoning ordinance that's kind of coming to council, which is recommended by Planning Commission. So there's some changes that sort of that align with that. It involves essentially, if you remember, the penthouse units on the 5th floor. They're looking to turn those into full-blown residential units and add 3 along the Planavon side. They're also looking to do that. It allows for second-floor office and potentially one of 2 scenarios they're asking for your guidance on today, which is sort of for the first floor, additional office space or sort of a carry-out cafe scenario. They're also looking to essentially, you saw some aesthetic changes there as well. They've created some garage-covered parking, which does meet sort of the setback requirements, et cetera. But they want some guidance and just to make sure that, this is a touch point to make sure that those proposed changes are in keeping with Planning Commission's goals for the site, with the direction of ordinance being changed. And so we're here just basically we want to make sure we get some clarification of direction on those items, as well as they have questions about sort of what can an outdoor seating arrangement look like given the developer's interest and commitment in sort of working with the city in redeveloping Schiffer Park. That design there in the rendering is sort of a placeholder. That's not a final product. But they're actively working with Parks and DDA on what that park could and should be in terms of a green space downtown. So they have questions on, so if there were to be outdoor seating with any sort of first floor use, whether office or otherwise, what would be an acceptable sandbox for how that could look? So, and if I missed anything, gentlemen, I'm sure you'll add to the conversation. So without further ado, I would like to bring up the applicant to kind of get into the details. And I think you guys have some extra copies, some additional things to kind of, I mentioned to them and Justin mentioned to them a lot of the conversation, feedback to date, sort of things like, possible additional retail on the first floor, what things could possibly look like. And so they've sketched some of that out, and they have some things, while it didn't make it into the packet, they have here for your review that I think Mark is going to distribute for you on the dais, or I can actually hand that out.
Good evening.
Thank you. Good evening.
My name
Welcome.
is Mark Shovers from Design House Architecture, 301 Walnut Boulevard. So as Jordan laid out, there's kind of 3 main things that we want to talk about tonight. The possible units in the penthouse, the revised parking with garages, and also the first floor use and park interaction. So I guess I want to start with like the 5th floor. Let me go to the next slide on here. keep the same shape of the penthouse that we originally had approved on the west wing and convert that into 12 one-bedroom, or 12 units, 7 one-bedroom, 5 two-bedroom, and then additional 3 units over on the east wing. Still all recessed off the 9 Mile side, so it's not intrusive on 9 Mile. Obeying by the 60-foot height limit of the new form-based code. Trying to utilize that space and maybe a more creating a more diverse unit mix in the building. I guess we're looking for guidance as far as us converting this penthouse and what concerns you guys might have as far as doing this.
Do you want to take it floor by floor? Is that kind of what are you asking for feedback on the top floor now?
I guess I kind of want to talk space by space rather than the whole packet as a whole. We can do that at the end, but I just want to kind of go space by space.
So on the 5th floor, what's the additional occupancy you've added? Because these aren't obviously penthouses anymore, right? These are one-bedroom apartments?
Correct. Before, they were the bedrooms of the 4th floor. So these are totally new separate units. So there's 15 total additional units.
And did you correspondingly increase parking?
Correct. Okay. So I guess those kind of those two tie together how the parking works. Because there was a revision to that to where we got a little bit more dense parking on site with the abandonment of the alley. We went perpendicular parking instead of angled parking, so we gained some spots in that way.
And what's the square footage of these these new apartments?
The 2 bedrooms are 900, and the 1 bedrooms are 650.
And you said that previously the penthouse were the bedrooms for the 4th floor, correct?
Correct.
So how has the 4th floor changed to accommodate that?
It mirrors the 3rd floor. So we had stairways. The living rooms, when we added the penthouses, the living rooms just became grander. They kind of had like an office desk area added to them, to where now the bedroom goes back down there, so the living room goes back to how the 3rd floor is laid out.
Did the penthouse, sorry, mic is not working. Does the penthouse have roof access to use that as a patio space, or?
We did have access on the 9 Mile side. We would like to discuss the possibility of the northern side, the Withington side, of access for those units as well.
Okay.
That was one of my questions as well, Michael. So there are currently balconies. Balconies, or I don't know, is it individual open spaces, or was it a shared space in the original proposal?
They were parceled off, so it wasn't. You couldn't have a large party up there. Each unit kind of had a smaller private deck area.
Right.
There's still that public deck area in the southeast corner. Mm-hmm. We're maintaining that, which was in the initial site plan approval.
Mm-hmm. So to add balconies on the north side facing Withington West is the question. We specifically on the dot did not have balconies and windows facing people's yards.
Right.
This wouldn't be through the chair. This wouldn't be facing the yards. It'd be facing the home there, Withington, right?
Mm-hmm. It'd be facing their balconies.
Balconies facing balconies.
Mm-hmm. How might they be screened? Would there be an opaque railing to a certain height, or how might how might it interact with Withington West behind it if there's
So
balconies?
the parapet wall comes up and it acts as your guardrail. So it's a solid wall 42 inches above the deck. So if you're sitting in a chair, you're just going to, all you could see is if you're at a level plane ahead. If you're down in the road, you're not going to see them if they're sitting down.
Hi, I'm Gal. I'm hanging out with Mark today.
How are you?
Thanks for talking to us. So one of the things, just so you know, we're getting a lot of emails and calls, and many of them are for ownership, for condos and so on.
Great.
And one of the concepts we had was possibly, if we do this, and it makes sense, was to, in the future, maybe make these into condos. So one of the features they really liked was having potential balconies and obviously having this great space on the roof. Right now, we're just intending to lease these premium units, if you want to call them that, more for long-term use. But that's one of the reasons that we're doing it. It's basically based on customer feedback.
Thank you. Any other comments on the increased, the request about height, the request about increased number of units? We've already talked about the parking offset and balconies.
I'm curious. You're pretty far along throwing this thing up. How does this impact your construction schedule to make this change?
Well,
don't you already have the fourth floor fleshed out pretty much?
Correct. Yeah, I mean, there's some minor changes to the fourth floor that will have to be done. The shell, that west wing, is still the same shell.
Okay.
So we're not losing time there. It's just the interior build-out time. We still had bathrooms and stuff like that up there, so it adds time, but it's not a significant delay or extension. If I had to ballpark it, I'm going to say a month, 2 months at the most extension.
Okay.
Through the chair, could you remind us what the term is of your parking agreement with Ferndale Foods, and whether you have the option to renew that agreement, and if you do, how many times you can renew it?
So it's a 3-year deal, and we pay, I think it's $35 a month per space. He has tons of extra space, and he said, yeah, let's keep doing it. But the only thing he signed for was 3 years, and then it keeps renewing. But in 4 years, if he sells the parcel, or 6 years, he could say, that's it, it's over. We can talk to him about further expansion. We did talk to some of the other local people, too, as well, landowners, including Ferndale Housing Commission. They have 10, 15 spaces, so they would love the additional income. Ed had a really good idea. Ed, tell him the idea.
Come on, Ed.
Come on, Ed.
Here.
I'm on site every day if anybody wants to come over and say hello to me.
Just yell up to you. Hi, Ed.
Yeah, that's right. So one of the things we spoke with Jordan about, as well as Joe, is potential for renting spaces from the city of Ferndale, both for some of these units, but also potentially for things we'll Mark will talk about in the future on the first floor and second floor, such that it's 24-hour use for that particular parking.
So if we were to see, or any other, if we were to see a site plan come back before us in the configuration for the fifth floor that they've just presented, I mean,
Through the chair.
the conversation here.
I'm fine with the layout. I think my question, when we talked about it the last time, was if we're doing these extra spaces or extra living spaces on top, is there a way to get more retail on the first floor? Was because we kind of were, I think, sad, real easy way to put it, about losing that street space. This is some additional retail right in the middle. Is there no possible way to get more retail along the sidewalk there? I mean, I think that's what we're looking as
So
a give.
the three gray towers that you see there halfway down, those are all prepped for, I don't know if you saw during construction, there was these steel frames that were along there. Those are all prepped so that the block can be knocked out put in glass storefront, and then retail could be there. So they're all prepped for future retail when the demand and the need is there. That example I showed you is just one of those portals being used. That's the first one heading west, but it could occur 3 or 2 more times, and they'd all be in a row, because you lose the parking ability in between them. You can't like divide them up.
That's great. That's what we asked for.
And you'd be losing, am I looking at this right? You'd be losing 4 parking spaces per retail bump in?
In that example that I gave you tonight, yeah, I lost 4 parking spaces to put that in.
So just so you know, we would love to do more retail. The question is, you have one and the other, so the parking. So we talked about hopefully working on the big parking structure. So we'd love to have our residents rent there, and we certainly don't want to increase parking in any city streets. But we'd love to do more retail, and if there's any good tenant, we might have one to say hi to you tonight in a minute as well. We'd love to do it. So it is set up for a lot more retail.
Through the chair.
Yes.
In your example that you have here, how much space is in this little retail bump in here?
That is about 800 square feet.
Okay.
Well, when it comes to, I don't know if you want to move on to whether it's 4th floor or if we've already kind of jumped ahead to the bottom floor. At least in my experience, geez, jumping ahead.
I'm sorry.
At least in my experience, if there's serious heartburn with something on a discussion item, you're gonna hear it. So I think the 5th floor, as long as you're thoughtful about the view and the balconies backing up to each other. And I know you've already got a setback there, so that would be the thing that we'd want to talk about when we come back with a site plan, is how that interacts with Withington West behind it, to try to maintain the most privacy as possible for both buildings.
Okay.
And through the chair, related to that upper level, just kind of looking for some clarity about how the zoning district changes enabled these changes to kind of take place. What is different on the underlying that has allowed this to? The previous plans are before my time on the commission, so I'm kind of making sure I'm just catching up on everything that came before here.
It actually might be a question for Jordan. Did you catch that one, Jordan?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. I would just say primarily it's the height change that has created this ability to basically move units upstairs and then create office on the first and second floor.
And the height change is from current 55?
Now, I believe it's 55, and now it will, under form-based code, assuming council adopts it in May, it would be
60. And as previously approved, it was for bedrooms on that upper level. It was maybe a little bit lower down in. Is that how you could fit them on that height?
It was, they've sort of done the grand tour of our process. They got a variance at the BZA to allow penthouse bedrooms on the 4th floor.
Okay.
Or 5th floor, sorry.
So not standalone units.
Correct.
All right.
So since we're talking about the parking and how it relates to additional units, I guess, so that northern part of the parcel and underneath the northern part of the building, with that alley being vacated, it allowed us to go perpendicular with the parking spaces. So that's how we get 91 on site compared to before. I believe we were 84. So that helps offset some of that additional parking demand of those additional 15 units. And in that, we added those 18 freestanding garages, or want to discuss that. Again, that's from the management company, and the calls have been coming in, correct? That people are wanting the privacy of knowing their car is secure rather than in an open public area.
Is it still under the building footprint?
Let's see. So that would be.
I see.
So it just kind of bumps out slightly a bit past that
I see.
northern facade, And the freestanding garages are 5 foot off the Housing Commission's property line for the setback that's required there. We're just trying to give a variety of different options to different tenants, the private parking versus the public parking.
Are you still considering eventually a pass-through drive, a connection to the site to the north?
Yeah, so for phase 2, when that goes ahead, that parking up there would be rearranged to allow the access. So right now there's an easement to get access to this garage, so that's why there's not spots here. But then you'd slide spots over there to get into that parcel. So they get slightly rearranged.
Wouldn't lose them.
What's that?
You wouldn't lose them, they'd just shift.
You wouldn't really, you might lose one, but then we also have all the parking that we're putting on that site. So that would all have to be refigured out, the parking for phase 2.
Thank you. Commissioner Azara's main question has been covered in what we talked about, in terms of the activity with the street front, and is there a way to, in addition to art and greenery and the things that were approved in the original site plan, is there a way to activate it? It sounds like there may be, if we're willing to lose a few parking spaces. Is that a conversation? So knowing that they've added some from what was approved in 2016, and now we'd be backing out by 4 per retail space. Any discussion up here about that balance? There wasn't ever conceived to be parking on site for anything other than residential use. So even as these, whether it's office or restaurant uses were contemplated on Planavon, those weren't ever supposed to be parked on site. Just for those who weren't.
Through the chair. We previously waived 13 spaces for this phase. Do we have to approve that again given these changes? So we gave approval based on a prior plan and that approval came with a waiver. Do we feel it necessary to revisit the waiver, 13 spaces?
Not unless there was a condition on the approval that said it needed to come back with any substantial change. Otherwise, we're fine.
So that was just a clarification.
Only if it increases. I don't.
Right. So are we getting an increase here? Are we getting an increase that would require that? Is I'm asking clarification for. And then is it on the sheet you just gave us? It says 87 spaces provided on site, but I thought I heard you say it was 91 now.
Yeah, my
That's
packet
with
says
the
91.
4 spaces lost for that retail.
Okay.
So there, in the
Got it,
packet, it's 91 without that retail,
Right.
87 with that retail.
Got it.
That math, it's tricky.
I have a
Yep. Sorry, I'm
question
just
for
looking at it. Please.
the bigger picture. I guess my curiosity is, when we're looking at the zoning district changes, and then, a change to an existing approved plan, and actually building that's, well along in the construction phase, then kind of changing that to address some of the issues of the new, zoning district changes, but not really in compliance with a lot of them. For instance, parking within the first 30 feet, those sorts of things. I'm kind of curious about what gets triggered at what level when we start to reassess either how we handle a plan that's been approved that wants to be modified, or a building that's under construction that then wants to have a new plan, or an existing building underneath that new zoning change that has been approved with past language. So what gets triggered when along that? So that might be a question for the city.
Yeah. And first of all, I don't think the zoning changes have had
Correct.
the final approval of council, right?
And this is, just without being present, this is kind of like a gray new area.
Can you?
Sorry, yeah.
Thank you.
So this is frankly sort of a gray new area. I mean, this is sort of the first time, at least since I've been here, that this has kind of been an issue where you've had so many sort of changes in flux, and And Mark could probably speak to this if I speak in error, but my understanding is because of the footings they had to build for this building, this is one of the only reasons this is really technically possible, or from a physical standpoint, the building's engineered to handle a lot of what they're talking about. They've sort of future-proofed on the retail. So we have some flexibility to even consider these from a physical standpoint just because of the future-proofing they've done and because of where it's at in the process. So there hasn't been sort of a specific rubric that said, you know, these elements of the new form-based code, which is in process, are going to be prioritized over these other ones. And these are, you know, there hasn't been that. It's just sort of a nature of the circumstance of how the building is unfolded and the timing of these different requests and of the consideration of the ordinance. So it's sort of just been an amalgamation of circumstance and engagement between the developer's request, city staff review, and then kind of bringing them here before you. From a staff perspective, in kind of navigating all that, sort of like, I guess, a net perspective on it, we feel this is a pretty strong alignment with the direction that if council approves it when it comes before them, we think given sort of the timing, the circumstance, and all of that, we think it pretty strongly aligns with that in terms of scooping out the wins where we can get them. But I think to your point, Commissioner, I think it would be a good idea to kind of lay out a rubric in terms of like going forward as some of these projects, if this happens again, like for example, if 409 on 9, when they get their HUD loan approval and then all of a sudden come and say they want to do, you know, whirligigs up on the roof, like to have a process in place, and I would be glad to facilitate and help with that and kind of carve that out.
I guess I would add that for any project that we review, so like let's say that it was built and it was done, we always look to bring things into more substantial compliance with any updates that have happened to the underlying zoning in the meantime since it was built. So if we look at it through that lens, we maintain the flexibility to say, all right, we can't get to 100%. They can't move the building back, right? But it is. Do we see that there's a benefit to bringing it, you know, into more compliance with the intent of the new, and understanding we're kind of in that month or two before things are approved, you know, with some finality at council.
Yeah, that was kind of where I was going with that question. Number one, you have that parking setback, and so you also have the active street level uses. As well as the private open area, as far as a minimum that is considered with the new text, as well as you know, the transparency, that the penetration as far as that goes. I think a lot of those things address some of the concerns that people have been bringing up about the building in general, and so kind of wondering about which one of those gets triggered. You get a benefit of additional height, but those other pieces that are in the code to go along with that for the benefit to the community as well. I want to make sure there's an appropriate nexus there for benefiting from new language while not neglecting what has been included in that language.
That might be an interesting point at which to talk about the park that's adjacent too. You know, so there is some private open space within the building, but there is also this existing public open space next to the building, if I'm understanding, or if I'm remembering. I understand your point if I'm remembering our ordinance correctly when it comes to open space.
I know that I was just looking at, I believe this is in the urban flex, is that correct, with a higher height limit? So that has like a 10% minimum of private open area. And then, yeah, I guess I'll leave it at that. I know that park is on a separate parcel that kind of has to be dealt with separately.
To that end, the balcony conversation.
Yeah, for sure. It brings it definitely. I don't know what percentage that gets to, but it starts to address some of that.
So it sounds like keeping things as much as possible in line with the updated ordinance would be the preference of the commission. I know it's Commissioner Azar's preference, only because she talked about it earlier. Seeing heads nodding.
I don't want to necessarily speak, I guess, through the chair for the developers, but I assume that you guys could probably be in a position to kind of speak to those elements when you come for a formal submittal. And staff could work with them on terms of lining that up and making sure that we kind of speak to those points.
And I do think it's pretty interesting to have those retail possibilities down below as far as knockouts for the future. I think it addresses some of that. It's as far as can be done with a building that's already under construction to make those kinds of changes for a code, or, you know, some text that was not in place beforehand. So it actually fits in pretty well. it does then increase the demand for parking spaces or the need for required parking spaces while reducing the number of spaces. So I want to make sure we think that process through the whole way from the beginning with eyes open. So not just what it looks like here without the retail added, but what that would look like with the retail. I'd want to be able to consider that.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments or anything in terms of have the city and the developer gotten the direction that you were looking for? Is there anything else?
I guess as far as the parking and the rearrangement, the garages and the freestanding garage, are there any issues that you guys see for that, providing that different use for the occupants?
No, if you've got your maneuverability, we had a fascinating conversation about maneuvering lanes at our last meeting. I learned so much from Michael and Brent. And mostly the thing that I learned was that we had some overlap between the zoning ordinance and the code of ordinances in terms of maneuvering lanes. So just to make sure that it's properly cited so that people can get around it safely and still get to that egress that goes out to Plantamon.
Yeah, I guess I had one question about that. As far as, through the chair, the standalone garages, I know with the new text, there's a rear adjacent to residential district, a 20-foot rear setback, and my understanding is to the north of this parcel.
It's R4 behind us.
R4.
It's the Ferndale Housing
Right,
Commission.
right.
Yeah.
So, with being an accessory structure versus the main structure, and then R4 is a lot different than an R1. So, I just was noticing that language in here. So,
So if you don't mind turning to page 1, any more questions? Because I have our first potential tenant here, and he just wanted to say hi to you and tell you what he's thinking.
I met him in the hallway. I didn't
good.
know he was
There
with
you go.
you.
This is Andrew Vickers.
Welcome.
Hi, how are you guys doing? First of all, I am looking to be the operating owner of the corner space at Plantamon and 9 Mile. So right at the corner space, I'm looking to do a cafe concept. A little about myself. I'm currently the operations manager at Birmingham Roast in downtown Birmingham. I was the general manager of Dessert Oasis in Rochester. I was the trainer at the Red Hook. I've been doing coffee basically my whole adult life. I got my start at Caribou Coffee when I was 18 years old in downtown Rochester, and definitely took a love for it. So I'm hoping to launch a fantastic new addition to your community using my 12 years of experience. I've got a really hospitality-driven business model, got a track record of success, and I'm really, really passionate about what I do. I went to Oakland, studied history. I spent my last year doing my senior dissertation on history of coffee in America. So I'm really excited about this location for several reasons. Being in a community like Ferndale has always been a dream of mine. The walkability, the close neighborhood feel, and the community's passion for independently run businesses has always made this a desirable location in my mind. The accessibility to parking is second on this list. I've found that this type of business does well only when there are ample parking opportunities, which I've kind of checked out the space, and it seems like it'll work just fine.
Yeah, in early morning you'll be fine, actually. A 9 Mile.
Thirdly, I just love where it's located. I'm really happy that it's not located on Woodward, but rather closer to the town center, smack dab in the middle of the community. I like that I will be able to pull a customer base from Ferndale and Oak Park and Pleasant Ridge and Detroit. I'd like to be clear that I won't be affiliated with any type of chain. It'll be independently owned and operated with a ton of love and a ton of care. So one of the things I wanted to look at was the accessibility for, or the availability of utilizing an indoor-outdoor concept from the months of May to October. It's essential, at least in my eyes, to grab the eye of cars passing by, and I really want to create an environment where people can see the community hanging out, enjoying the weather that we're lucky enough to be provided in the summers. We're looking to install garage door style walls that can be opened up during nice days, further extending that feel. If you look around the country, this concept is being featured more and more, especially with cafes. Locally, you can observe this at my current cafe, Roast, as well as Commonwealth in downtown Birmingham, where they have they open it up. Same thing with Atomic and Royal Oak, and then they have patio seating outside. So I'm looking to utilize the corner location both on 9 Mile and on Planavin, hoping to set 3 to 4 tables up on the Planavin side as well as the 9 Mile side. I really feel that it would strongly attract members of the communities to park and be a great town meeting place for years to come. And also, just having a coffee shop kind of draws the community to that side of town a little bit more. So for future retail spaces that are looking to go into Ferndale House, they have a reason to come grab a cup of coffee and then go do their shopping. If you're looking for more specifics, I'm looking to do really great locally roasted coffee, just prepared exceptionally. I'm looking at carrying Michigan-only roasters, utilizing a great espresso machine, and I hope to put out world-class coffee for the whole community to enjoy. I want to source locally for the baked goods, as well as utilize all of your local grocery stores for buying my ingredients. I'm really hoping on utilizing my network in the coffee community to hire some great baristas, as well as employing 6 to 10 hopeful residents of Ferndale. I plan on taking up residence in Ferndale House as well, so you'll have an owner on site pretty much 24/7, kind of looking out for the neighborhood and taking exceptional care of the space. I strongly believe in being a positive member of whatever community I'm in, and I'll be looking to involve myself in your community in whatever way I can in order to be successful and also just help make Ferndale a great place to be.
That was like lovely and warm and fuzzy. Thank you.
I also included just some pictures of what I'm planning on doing.
Okay.
Just grab some pictures from, cafes that I really like, and if you would like to take a look.
Sure, we can pass it
Yeah,
out.
absolutely.
Yeah, so I guess my first question, Jordan, is are we at a 0 lot line setback on the east side, on the Schiffer Park side?
Yes, that is correct.
So what we'd be talking about at a minimum is, thank you, at least I would think what we'd be talking about at a minimum is some type of easement agreement or something similar that would allow for whatever our sidewalk cafe setback is now.
That's correct.
But I imagine we probably want to have a slightly larger conversation about the rebuilding of that park space. Is that something that Parks and Rec is working on?
Yes, there's
already?
been some preliminary plans kind of floated around. The developers have worked really closely with Lorena and Parks in terms of identifying a concept. I think they're pretty far along in terms of like what the potential layout could be. If you guys want to speak to that a little bit, but yes, I think one of the big elements of clarity is sort of what is an acceptable envelope for what a sidewalk cafe might look like in this space.
Well, I think you'll have a sidewalk cafe, and then obviously there'll be other options in the park. So maybe that's kind of the question is like, how do you delineate something? Okay.
Yeah. So we had a conversation with her. The park has a couple, design ideas floating around. Water features, and we talked about some kids things, and maybe a little dog park. So we're talking about it. We didn't finalize anything. We're obviously waiting for comments from, we're not making the decisions. Your park. So, and then as far as the, any potential seating. What she mentioned was she wanted to have a real tenant present something real. So she says, "Give me something actual."
The recreation director?
No, Lorena.
The rec director.
She's the director. Okay,
Okay,
sorry.
yep.
Yeah. I said recreation director. I was thinking basketball.
Parks and Rec. Yeah.
She does that too.
Yeah.
She does the yes.
Yeah. So she does the basketball too?
Yeah, Parks and Rec.
Oh my
yeah.
gosh! All right.
Parks and Rec.
Excellent. So we just talked briefly about if we did any tables on Planavin, how it would go, and whether we have some picnic tables, and more importantly, if you put those things out there, that everything's clean. I don't like it messy. So, those are kind of things. But she said first have an actual real tenant and what their idea is, and then let's talk about that, and then she'll give her recommendations.
Okay.
So.
Thoughts or comments? I mean, I think there's the sidewalk cafe ordinance that, like the lowest barrier of entry would be like comply with that, and whether or not there needs to be an easement agreement or something. I don't know if it even needs to go that far, but
Yeah, I don't have
Sorry,
a.
I'm sorry, Commissioner Casio?
Oh, sure,
Yeah.
sure.
Sure. My only comment was just based on your photo showing a fence around this seating.
What
that-
doesn't, the fence
Sure.
totally doesn't need to be there.
Yeah, sure. I
I'm
would just think that
basically looking for
fencing
the
off
seating.
a park
Yeah.
property would be kind of
Yeah.
a negative aspect.
No,
but-
absolutely.
Oh, yeah, we understand. It's like what are we going to require versus what would we like, and some of those are different things. So, well, yeah.
Sure. Through the chair, I think that I don't have a problem with the outdoor cafe. We've got ordinances that govern that. I am concerned about green space, though. So, like, I think a water feature sounds nice, but all I hear of water feature is more concrete. So, I would err on the side of maximizing green space. It's not a huge park, you know. Sana sits there once a year. I mean, that's pretty much all it's used for now. But if we can, you know, buffer out and protect some of that green space, that would be my ideal.
Through the chair, I might as well.
He knows because he sits there once a year at Christmas in a particular wetsuit.
Yeah, as far as the park goes, I think this is something that's really needed in Ferndale, is a great place of refuge. There's not many places where you can actually sit, recharge, some place that's comfortable to linger a little bit and then, you know, stay in the area. I think some people maybe cycle through faster than they otherwise would, so it's good for tenants all around. Longer stays, comfort, but I think flexibility is really important for that space. And if there is going to be an adjacent business that is using it, I think it needs to be clearly identified as accessible to everybody, whether they're part of that, using that business or not. And so I just want to make sure we have that point of refuge, flexibility. And I think I second the comment about water features sound nice, but it's a small space already and really would eat into it. So.
Through the chair, going along with Commissioner Goering's comments, I think not just with the cafe concept idea, but with the development as a whole, it needs to be made very clear to any future residents that this is not the property of the development, that this is a public property, and that anyone from the public can be occupying that space as they see fit. That's kind of an area where I see the potential for a little bit of a clash with residents feeling some ownership or some entitlement to that space when it's actually a public space. So I think that's a broader concern for any business that goes into the retail spaces down there, but also for the residents, that it's very clear that it's a public park.
Particularly, just to second that, I mean, historically, we've had concerns raised about residents of the Housing Commission occupying, and it is a public park. So.
Oh yeah, it's a very heavily used space in terms of, you know, we're having more people with less access to their own yards living downtown, right? So this really is the neighborhood's yard. And in terms of, you know, what we require versus what we like in outdoor seating, only because I've seen it happen downtown and in Midtown where I've worked for years, and in Birmingham now where I work, that balance between reserving outdoor seating for your patrons and encouraging, you know, sort of public access. So you may even find that you want to have a small area, you know, negotiate with the city to have a small area that says these are the 3 tables as if I were a sidewalk cafe and they're for my business, and then it's very clear that the rest is public.
That sounds great.
Just kind of thinking it through, I mean, that might be particularly on the 9 Mile side where there is sidewalk cafe space. You know, that might be part of the conversation is how do we balance public and private so that you have some clear delineation visually and in terms of what you're responsible for with trash and whatnot and what other people are. And I could see a conflict arising if we're too informal about which space is which.
I would just, through the chair, echo that and think about some spaces where we have allowed patio space to creep into public space, and then it becomes a dominated restaurant space, and you lose that park atmosphere, that public atmosphere. So that would be my concern.
But in general, it sounds lovely.
Okay, great.
You're welcome.
Well,
It sounds
thank you guys very
wonderful.
much.
Yeah.
And I'm really looking forward to working with you guys.
Wonderful. Thank you. Likewise. Jordan, is that clear enough direction? Sorry, you just got a question from behind you and in front of you. No, there's no.
I don't think so. But I think that's, so just kind of doing the quick check, and I appreciate the question, Madam Chair. Basically, we got direction on the height, the penthouses, we got direction on the garages, we got direction on the park and the public space. I think, and on the retail, you guys have future-proofed it. I think we've got everything we need, unless I'm seeing heads nod in the affirmative. So I think we are good and clear, and so the next time you see this, it'll be sort of a formal application, baking in your feedback. So thank you very much for that direction.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Okay, we will move to item number 6A, our administrative item this evening. It's an update on housing developments in the approval and construction pipeline.
Nope.
So first off, before I jump into this, I do want to just give Aaron and Justin credit for assembling a really great presentation. One of the things that we as a department worked on was there's a lot of development going on in town, and we wanted to start putting that outward as best as we can. And we started with a sort of a soft launch of that effort. We brought in all the city departments in here into this room and kind of gave an update of here's all the projects. Here's, you've heard about some that are in discussion, some are in construction, some are, in approval in this weird purgatory space. And so we wanted to kind of demystify what's actually happening in town. And so this is part of that, and we're really excited to provide this update to the Planning Commission. And I just did want to give those kudos to Justin and Aaron for compiling all this information and putting it in a really great format. So I'll go through this, and if I'm going too fast, if you want to ask questions, just stop me. I'll watch for hands and everything else, but I'll try to be brief as well. So just a review overall, and that green does not really play up there very well, so sorry about that. But if you may recall, as part of the master plan, we had the Gibbs Planning Group do a market study, kind of projections, the next 5 years, what could we absorb in two specific areas that the master plan cared about was sort of your downtown and your what you call the industrial area. And let me see, I'm going to play with slides here. Pardon me, we don't have that map in there. But basically, essentially what you're looking at is downtown, the footprint of downtown, sort of a quarter mile, 9 mile, and Woodward in all directions. The industrial area, that's sort of your M1 district, your Woodward Heights, your Wolcott, your Lewiston sort of area. And that study projected about 520 units over 5 years. So you can kind of see sort of the status. We're looking at about 422 total in the downtown area. That's when you kind of count like 25 units under discussion, 196 in progress, and 201 during the construction phase. So in progress is they've been at Planning Commission, maybe they've got an approval or two, maybe they still need to go to council, maybe they still need to actually get site plan approval. That's generally what you're looking at in terms of downtown residential. In the industrial area, projected sort of 415 units.
Sorry,
over
the next Chair, can I stop you? Because
Yeah,
the memo's
absolutely.
got different numbers on it.
Oh,
So
sure.
downtown, it's got actual units discussed 25, 196 actual units approved, and actual units construction is 98, and I think you said 201.
Yes. You know what? I apologize for that. So I think essentially what you're looking at under construction in the downtown is Ferndale House, and you're looking at, I think, one of the previous versions of this, and that might be where this trips up, is I think that counts the Wilson site, and I think it counts, it counted the Livernois condos when those were still under construction. So the number in your memo is accurate. So I apologize for that brief typo there.
Okay, no, it's fine. Thank you.
Thank you for pointing that out.
So the smaller numbers, right?
Correct. So if you look at the industrial, this is just sort of, again, just overall. And then sort of, we have there sort of other areas sort of not in the study zone. You've got 179 that have been discussed, 3 units in progress. That's your 3-unit structure on Vester. I think that's 244 Vester Street in the R3 zoning on Vester. And then 100 units in construction, and that's your Robertson Brothers project, your Taft and Wilson sites. The 179 discussed. That's Iron Row Apartments. That's 142. Yeah. And there's also the El Shaddai Church, which I think was the balance of that discussion. And then citywide residential total you can see sort of on the bottom. And again, sorry for the confusion in the numbers between the presentation and the memo.
I've got the
Online
exact
matches.
numbers, I
When
think.
did you get this?
As you
So
have.
do I.
Yeah, what's online for us
Okay.
is the same that you're showing us.
Okay,
up
cool.
here.
Oh, so
All
you know
right,
what?
so then-
This is my printed packet, so this must be an earlier version of the
Okay,
memo.
so then this is accurate. Okay, sorry about that.
That's all right.
That one is on me. I apologize. So, our effort to inform you has failed. No, I'm just kidding.
One quick question. You said the Iron Ridge Apartments are part of the other section?
They would be
Industrial, right?
yes, I believe so. They are sort of because that's Bermuda, just on the other side of Iron Ridge. I believe that's counted in there.
Okay.
Yes.
In the industrial, not in the other.
I'm sorry. In the I apologize.
Curiosity.
No. I think it's in the other areas not studied.
Okay.
Yes. Sorry about that. Yep. Yes. I'm trying to mentally go through the projects in my head just to make sure. And I think we've got some detail on that as well. We'll kind of dive into. Sort of in the aggregate, you can kind of see what you're looking at. Housing development review. The majority of the housing development proposed is multiple family for rent at about 55% of what you're looking at. You know, the PowerPoint kind of rounds up on you. So it says 56% on the graph. It's about 55% of the overall housing mix is this multifamily residential. Though there are 856 units proposed overall, which on its face, that sort of blows the projection out of water over 5 years, the majority have only been in discussion phase. And sort of the lesson there is that while you've got some volume being built right now, it may take that entire 5 years for that whole pipeline to work itself through. You know, economic conditions, you've got, you know, a lot of the conversations we hear in the development community, okay, there's this conversation about tariffs. What's that going to do to construction costs? What's that going to do to tradesmen? You know, there's all kinds of sort of variables out there that could affect the timing on some of these projects. So that's kind of, you've got that sort of pipeline of 856, and then you're actually looking at a smaller sliver of that actually being built right now. So that's sort of the story on the aggregate side. And then one of the exercises that we've done, and Councilman Martin will be familiar with this slide, in terms of looking at this development and sort of seeing elements of the master plan come to life and developers proposing projects for various sites, we've started to look at development in buckets because different areas of the city have different needs, different priorities. Even though we are only 4 square miles, there's a uniqueness to areas of the city. So it's not sort of a one-size-fits-all approach. So we've kind of generally, and there's no sort of hard science to this, it's just an effort to sort of, you know, look for trends, look for patterns, and sort of think of this in a bite-sized chunk type of way. You've got downtown, which is sort of west of Woodward to Livernois. Vester to East 9 Mile, so Woodward to the railroad tracks, East Breckenridge to Troy, and then Livernois 9 Mile to 8 Mile, Pinecrest to Allen. And then you also have what we call sort of Iron Ridge, North Hilton. And these aren't, you know, these aren't like identity names that you're going to start seeing banners about or anything like that. It's just sort of, again, they're organizing tools. You know, Iron Ridge to Hilton is sort of 10 Mile to Camborne, Gainsborough to Hilton, Wanda to South Hilton, sort of a Hilton to West End, 9 Mile to 8 Mile zone. So that's kind of, you think of the different areas of the city. These 5 we see sort of capture the majority of the projects going on throughout the city. And so looking at Zone 1, you're going to see a bigger blown up version of the maps, a lot more useful in this application. You can kind of see the major developments here. The development on Troy, our mixed use stack at Troy and Allen. Ferndale House, which we heard a little bit about tonight. Brooks Brewing, which is going in near Treat Dreams. The James, which is the St. James School, kind of turning into, that was the other one in the downtown, 104 units there. I apologize. I knew we were missing one, but that's 104 units of senior housing going in at the former St. James School. So that's under construction now. And then the WCO restaurant, that's Jeff King's third sort of restaurant next to Public House, that's also in progress. And then just kind of, I'm going to breeze through some of these. Again, stop me if you want to spend a little more time on these, just as a little close-up on some of those projects so they're a little more than bullet points in a list. You've got the mixed-use development here that we're looking to break ground before the end of 2018. You get your 400 parking spaces, 2 levels of office, ground-level commercial, and up to 25 units of housing of what we're lovingly calling Parcel B along Allen. And obviously, that is part of the PUD approval this project received. We're not looking to build sort of like a Brutalist, you know, kind of box. That's going to have some finalized design, and no offense to the Brutalist fans, but that'll have to come back for another look in terms of when that's sort of fully fleshed out. But this is sort of a general idea to give you a sense of the massing and what's going there.
Okay, you're giving me heartburn when you talk about before the end of 2018. I thought we were at May.
I'm not going to steal Joe's thunder. He's got the exact details, so I'm sort of taking the generalist approach here.
All right.
So Joe will be given that. He's at the conference in Tacoma this week.
Oh, I'm calling him.
You should, but I just don't want to. I don't want to misspeak. Joe is sort of the face and the champion of this project, and he's got more command of the details than anybody. So I'm just sort of, basically looking at it from that perspective.
Okay.
And so just another close up of sort of this more than just the development. You got the shared street concept, the streetscape. We can spend more time on these if you want. I'm just going to kind of be brief. And then you sort of the view from the back. So obviously we had the resident steering committee. We talked a lot about how this thing's going to look from the neighborhood, how it's going to look from Troy, the green elements, the living wall, screening the parking, making sure the setbacks are there so people aren't able to stare into residential. Sort of making sure this sort of as nicely as a mixed-use deck can plays well with the neighborhood around it. And we've had those voices at the table. So then you have Ferndale House, which obviously this is an older rendering. You saw obviously the updated version. So you're going to have that 106 residential units. You're going to have the ground level activation. You have the second story office. And then they're looking at, as you heard tonight, looking at an October completion date for the construction. St. James Senior Living, just a close up of that. You can see they're going to have the new building next to the old school. And that's where the majority of the units will be, so that new 3-story structure on the former convent site. And they're looking at a late 2018 completion. So then Vesser to East 9 Mile, kind of moving forward. The major projects here, 409 on 9 apartments. That's the mixed-use 127-unit residential that's proposed for and approved for across from Credit Union 1, the block from Paxton to Leland. They are waiting on final application approval from HUD. They're getting financing through the Housing and Urban Development Department. That's why they can't even demo right now, because if they change any of the conditions on what they applied at, they have to start over on the application process. So they're assuming on a conservative scenario that they're going to lose this construction season because they're waiting for HUD. If HUD gives them the go-ahead anytime soon, they could probably get demolition and site work done. But we're watching them, and they're looking at, my guess is they'll be about where Ferndale is. Ferndale House is right now, this time next year. That's my guess at this point. And that could change depending on how quickly HUD moves. You also have the North Star project, which is the corner lot at 9 Mile and Bermuda. That was approved for, I want to say, 24 units. Could be wrong on that unit count, but they have a site plan approval that expires in the fall. They were approved 2 years ago, but with the conversations around Comos, I think they were kind of watching and seeing what was going to happen with that corner before they pulled the trigger. Excuse me, sorry, but they're basically on track. I think they look to break ground on something before 2018, something being what was actually approved. So we're working with them very closely. And then Incubizo, which is a co-working brand that Search Optics, one of our major employers, owns out of California, they're bringing here. They actually made a change where originally 531 Vester was going to be co-working. They've just about filled it up. So they're actually making a switch where they're going to put their headquarters in 531 Vester, and they're going to make their current headquarters 1938 Burdett, all co-working and event space. They're going to lease an upstairs floor for overflow as they need it. So that's kind of exciting. That they're looking at, actually, the first tenant moves in on May 1st. The second tenant, which is the Chamber, I think is already kind of there. But that agreement has been in the works for a while to give the Chamber free offices there in exchange for sort of hosting programming there and activating the space. Wilson Park Village, that's already under construction. The model house is almost done, and they're going to be building those as they sell them. That's over there just southeast of downtown. This is the 409 on 9 apartments project, so that was sort of a collaboration between the developer, city staff, and planning commission, and resident feedback in terms of adding retail to the site, doing some similar future-proofing to what Ferndale House has done in terms of, because of the height of the first floor, providing stub utilities so that as demand for retail increases, some of that, we may decide that we want to just keep the green space that they put. But if there is sufficient demand for retail and sufficient interest from the community, that can be retail one day if it needs to be. But right now, it's going to be a really great green space, dog park, empty, sort of unprogrammed space as well. And then they're adding some on-street parking there as well. So 127 apartments and about 6,000 square feet of commercial and retail space. So this is that 3 units that were currently under construction on 244 Vester. It's an R3 area, so essentially it's a 3-unit development, and I believe those are owner-occupied townhomes. This is the North Star project at 165. So it was 27 units. Apologies, not 24. Again, looking to break ground in fall of 2018 for a 10 to 12-month construction window. Wilson Park Village, this is the 28 single family on the former University High School site adjacent to Wilson Park. They're looking at 12 to 16 months to finish all the homes. So there's that. And moving to the Livernois zone, again, this is Livernois, 8 Mile to 9 Mile, Allen to Pinecrest. You're looking at the Parkdale Towns. That's the 72 townhomes north of Garbett Park. Those are under construction. The site work is underway. The fencing is up, and they'll probably, I don't know that they'll start building townhomes before year end, but they may. They're really kind of gearing on both Wilson and Taft right now. 1741 Livernois, that was the former American Legion Hall. That's 8 condos that have all been sold. Pinecrest Holdings, that is obviously still in discussion phase and much more to be sort of vetted out on that. They have, obviously no sort of groundbreaking or anything scheduled because that's all contingent on getting to a point where it's reached acceptability in terms of community input, planning commission direction, et cetera. But that's sort of in the docket, if you will. Then the Livernois resurfacing, that's going to be a major project. We have a community meeting. That one is set for, we're going to have 2 times at the Kulik Center on the 26th for businesses in the community to kind of understand what the game plan is, some of the some of the relief options we're doing in terms of, disrupting Livernois and doing the resurfacing, which will result in a more safe, efficient configuration for the bike lane, which will become a protected lane, as well as striping the existing on-street parking and using that parking as a buffer for the bike lane in areas where it's possible. So we're looking at roughly a June 1 to November 10 window, and our contractors tell us that that's sort of the conservative, accounts for any potential delays, anything with weather, and also the fact that we're phasing it so that we can keep at minimum 1 lane of traffic going in each direction.
What times are those meetings on the 26th?
So I believe we have a flyer. I apologize, I can't remember off the top of my head. I will share that out with the committee. I believe that we have 1 in the morning and 1 in the evening, essentially.
Okay.
So that's that section. Then just again, another closer look at some of these projects, the Parkdale Towns, with sort of those north-south green spaces you can see that we got as part of the community benefit for that PUD, 72 for-sale townhomes. Then there's the Livernois condos. And then this is, again, a very old version of the, actually not too old. Looks like it's a little, it obviously still hasn't had the tweaks from the 21st, but that's sort of an older drawing of Hayes Lemmers as it was proposed. So obviously, again, more changes to come on that. Then the Iron Ridge North Hilton zone, you're looking at Iron Ridge Phase 1, which has kind of been their activating spaces as they fill the buildings. They're also doing a lot of environmental site remediation on that site. That's the former E-Prize building. 928 East 10 Mile, that's the former El Shaddai Church, which was proposed and approved for some apartments. Iron Row Apartments, which is on Bermuda across from Iron Ridge. 1201 Woodward Heights, which is proposed for additional housing. Drifter Coffee in the Iron Ridge District, and then the Gainsborough resurfacing. So I'll kind of buzz through those. Excuse me, this is the Iron Row Apartments, 10 Mile, Woodward Heights, and Hilton. So it's purely residential, but a lot of public spaces, multiple buildings, street-level activation. And that's 108, I apologize on the number there, it's 108 apartments across 3 buildings along Bermuda. Looking to break ground in the fall of 2018, 12 to 14 months of construction. This is 1201 Woodward Heights. If it looks familiar, it's because it's from the same developer that did the townhomes at 9 in Livernois. 16 for-sale condominiums. Groundbreaking expected fall of 2018, 10 to 14 months construction. And so they're still moving through their processes as well, though. So then this is the 928 East 10 Mile Apartments, which were approved for 28 apartments. Again, a redevelopment of the former church. Groundbreaking expected fall of 2018. Zone 5, again, I'm just trying to be brief, but if you have questions, don't feel like you can't stop me. CN terminal expansion here, which we expect to finish by year end. That includes a buffer wall along Fair Street as well as the resurfacing of Fair. Then the 1-800 self-storage along 8 Mile in that sort of funky service drive sort of south of Bennett, and then East Bennett multifamily. So you can see this is sort of the East Bennett apartments. This is 8 multifamily units looking to break ground in fall of 2018. And that's generally the development update. So I know that was a lot, try to be brief, but I also wanted to make sure that as a department that we're getting this information out there. These are the projects that are in the docket right now.
I think this is nicely presented. Is there something Kara can do with this that makes it like a self-paced PowerPoint on the website that anybody, outside of trying to look through our minutes and stuff like that,
yeah,
just literally put it on the face of the city webpage, let them click and watch it.
As long as it's clear what's approved and what's not.
Yeah.
Yes. We had a lot of great feedback from the departments. One of the things we're going to do is make this like a minute 30 video that plays in that way, and it kind of, you can kind of clearly enumerate those details and say, here's what's up and here's what's happening. We're looking at a major overhaul of the CED section of the website to incorporate a lot of this information. The U of M CID School of Information partnership that we have, they're making a prototype that should be done within about 2 weeks, I think, which is going to be essentially, we have a GIS-based map that you can kind of turn on and off layers and see what types of development are up and where they're at in the process. So there's like sort of like a green, red, yellow type of, where is this going right now? And then we're going to have project sites for each of sort of the major ones, like your Livernois resurfacing, your Hayes Lemmers, and there will be ways that you can say, leave a comment. What phase is this in right now? What's the next phase? Like, if you want to stay engaged, like click this button, give us your email address, and it's actually, I envision a lot of poop emojis in our future, but I think it's going to basically, there's an emoji rating scale that you can kind of say that worked out really well in our strategic plan process, but it helps. It helps the process. I mean, I think, the comments on the 21st actually helped. I think Hayes Lemmers, if it moves forward, will be much stronger than it was because of that comment period. And so what we're trying to do is make that interface streamlined. And so to answer that, sort of a longer answer probably than you hope for, but the idea is we're going to do that. We're going to make it sort of digestible.
Great, and don't bury it on the CED site. I'm sure the new site will be fabulous.
Oh.
But put it right on the cover and put a hard copy at the library.
We will, yes, and I'm glad you said that, because if you go to the homepage now and you have those sort of hot buttons at the start, we're replacing the guide to development, which apparently still has Derek listed as the director. We're going to get that link out of there, and we're going to have basically a direct link on the ferndalemi.gov homepage to current and upcoming projects. You go there, it'll be one portal, so they won't have to really search and dig for it. It'll just be go to our homepage, and there it is.
Okay.
So Aaron said that there's going to be sort of branding or design coordination between the public hearing notices and the website so everything looks consistent.
Right.
Whether you're looking at it online or not.
This is not a bill. Don't throw it out. Yes.
Right.
Exactly.
On the housing developments, I've been wondering, and I'd be interested in knowing if you guys have any suggestions on where to do additional research other than like ask realtors, which I think is not the appropriate research, about whether or not we're attacking this idea of us needing more move-up sized homes from the wrong end. And again, this is very observational, which is why I'm wondering if you have thoughts on this. I have any number of friends who are in 3, 4, maybe even more bedroom homes in Ferndale who want and need to downsize and can't, because what we don't have in Ferndale are single story, retire and age in place options. And I'm wondering if we have sort of a pipeline, if we've choked our pipeline at a different point than what we're identifying. And Robertson says, let's build 2,000 square foot 4-bedroom homes. Those exist here. My parents can't move out of them, because there's nowhere to go. Well, my parents went to Madison Heights because that's where brick ranches are. So I wondered if there were other thoughts on this, or if anyone knows of research that's been done on this housing pipeline as this generational shift happens. Because I wonder if we're attacking the top end when really we should be attacking the slightly smaller end for aging in place options. Or
Yeah, there really
balancing
doesn't
it.
seem
It was
to
a
be
big
much.
balanced conversation for Pinecrest Holdings.
Doesn't seem to be much that isn't going to require stairs.
Right.
I thought the same thing. There's the St. James development, which is, what are they calling, a luxury retirement community.
Yeah.
That's the only one. But you can't downsize into a bungalow when you're trying to downsize because of age.
It was a point I made to the Pinecrest Holdings folks a couple times publicly. It's something else that Jordan and Aaron and I talked about, just as an aside in a different conversation, is are we hitting we've identified the problem, but are we hitting the right solution? And I don't know nationally if there are trends in this in inner ring suburbs and things that were built at the same time as us that have, we have big houses with a lot of stairs and not a lot of balance in housing types. And should we be adding, rather than more big houses with stairs, more balance in housing types?
I suspect Ferndale House would probably say that they're addressing that because they have elevators and their units are all on one floor.
That's a good point.
That said, of course, if they're looking to start at $1,400 a unit,
Right.
that's likely going to be beyond the price range a lot of people want to pay or are able to pay.
That's my only question for the commission on our housing development. Is, are we hitting the right end of the pipeline?
I have one question,
Yeah, please.
and it's for George. When you talked to the superintendent about the addition of the Pinecrest Holdings PUD, was that a question that said, given our current housing stock, if we just said Pinecrest Holdings, are we good? Or was it, given our current housing stock, in addition to what we just identified as 500, I think, plus new homes, is that sustainable? And is she going to write a letter or a memo to that effect?
I'll clarify that. The original question was sort of verbatim from the Planning Commission discussion about Hayes Lemmers, but that's a good question, and I'll pose that to her.
Okay, thank you.
Because it's the same, I mean, when they put out their RFP, when the schools put out their RFP for those sites, it was specifically for, we want to attract more families to go to Ferndale Public Schools. So how many times have we reiterated this now?
Right.
Over and over.
Through the chair.
I meant how many times have the schools, not we.
Oh,
to you.
sure.
No, I'm sorry. No, I
Sure.
meant how many times have the schools solicited that?
Right. I think this is a great opportunity to just get that on letterhead as well. I think they seem very supportive of additional housing on that site, but I think it's a worthy question of like, well, what about the other 400 units that we're rolling with?
Through the chair, if I could. The breakdown was great. I think it's what we asked for. Additionally, could we have an understanding of, like Kate's saying, what the housing type is, or what part of the market the housing? It seems to me everything that's coming in is high mid to high end housing, or high end apartments, or high end condos with balconies. If we could have an understanding of what spectrum, I guess, of the scale we're hitting with that, and where we're at as far as the new ordinances with the inclusive housing requirements.
Definitely, yeah, we can get that together.
Nice job.
Thank you.
Through the chair, would any of the developments that have been discussed but aren't currently under construction or are maybe in the earlier stages, how, if at all, are any of these going to be impacted by the new affordable housing ordinance?
That's a great question. I wish, frankly, I wish we had the ordinance maybe 5 years ago. That being said, anything that's sort of in the pipeline now, like for example, with Hayes Lemmers, on phase 2, absolutely they will have to meet it. Phase 1, it's been this exercise of, even though there hasn't been an approval, it's been under discussion for multiple years. It's sort of been out there. So we've been working with them to basically meet the spirit of the ordinance. My understanding, and I can get clarity on, like from Dan Christ, in terms of legally does it apply. My understanding as of today is that it's a new development unapproved, so they would have to meet the ordinance in some way. Where it gets fuzzy with them is that it's owner occupied, and so while the ordinance is agnostic on, like, it doesn't really care if it's renter housing or owner occupied, there, at least to my knowledge, there's not sort of a hard and fast way to apply affordability to owner occupied. We're working with them on a solution that works for us, but that's sort of where that's at. So it's a longer way of saying it would apply to Hayes Lemmers. Sorry.
And we would definitely, I will speak for everyone, not approve phase 1 with some promise of future compliance.
Right, and that's we're on the same page with staff. We wouldn't bring that to commission. Like, basically, where we're gonna take it is we're gonna come up with an affordability solution for phase 1, and anything that gets baked in with phase 2. Both it'll be a condition of the PUD, and it's sort of law in ordinance in that they'll have to meet it, so it'll be protected in both ways. But yes, we won't bring you something on phase 1 that does not contain an affordability solution.
I rarely feel comfortable speaking for everyone, but on that one,
Yeah.
Mr. Williamson, did you have another question?
I actually do have one more. How long, once they get their site plan approval, and I know this is in the ordinance, I should know this, how long does that last before it expires?
2 years.
Okay, so if they don't, what are the specific hurdles that they have to get over in order to be within that 2-year period? Do they have to break ground and actually begin construction?
I will clarify for that for the commission. I should know that off the top of my head. I don't. I apologize. I'll get that to you. But sort of spoiler alert that North Star may be coming to you in May or June to seek an extension for that project.
Okay, I mean, I asked because I know at least one of the projects we saw is currently being marketed for sale.
Yeah.
The El Shaddai, you probably are aware of that, with the approval. And, you know, with all of these, with the many units potentially floating around out there, I'm just wondering how long these apples stay ripe before they fall down. Thanks.
That's right.
Mm-hmm. Through the chair. As far as the Pinecrest Holdings, the phase 1 and phase 2, was there site plan approval to phase 1?
No.
Right. So my concern there still is we're still talking about it as phase 1 and phase 2. I don't know why they're considering that. Like, it just doesn't seem clear that the PUD requirements is phase 1.
Right. I think what they're looking at, I won't sort of not trying to speak for them. I think just sort of my read of the situation is very similar to in terms of the way Robertson Brothers went about the Taft site. It's all one project. The difference is they enumerated everything going on in the entire property, but there are elements that they're starting with. They're working on, you know, this section over here first, and then phase 2 is this section over here. They're getting 3 years to build that out in phases. I think what Hayes Lemmers is trying to do is use that same sort of approach, but the difference again is they have not enumerated specifically what's happening on the southern portion of the site. And so that is another tweak that we gave them as direction, that's going to have to be clarified. So when they come to you again, it'll have basically an answer for that southern portion of the site and the tweaks that were required and requested by this commission and the public for phase 1. So they may continue to use that sort of terminology, but they will be required to provide you before they come back before you in sort of a formal setting, a full vision for that, you know, an answer for that whole property.
Through the chair, what are the options that the city has if they come to us with a complete plan, get it approved, and then just stop after they build their phase 1?
So essentially what the lever would be is, as I understand it, if they broke performance on the PUD, that would trigger, you know, you jeopardize your incentives and you wouldn't get a C of O. So there's 2 levers at least that my department would have to prevent them from doing that unless they want to unravel the whole project. You know, and that's sort of again why we kind of make them go through site plan before they get incentives, is so that that's all clarified and we have that leverage.
Okay, that helps.
That was my question, so thank you for answering.
Other questions or conversation on the housing report? Al's got a question. Come on.
Madam Chair, thank you.
Come on up to the mic. Come up to the mic. Sorry. That's why I even restated Erin's statement when she was not on mic.
That's an amazing amount of housing that's going to be going up here in Ferndale. I mean, I've been sitting back there floored by the extent of development in the city. And hopefully it's predicated on I know there's a housing shortage in this country, and Ferndale is a desirable city for a lot of people. I'm worried about the gentrification, and I think that goes to what you guys are talking about in terms of the housing not being upper scale, and it would tend to drive out people on fixed incomes, lower income folks, because taxes go up, prices go up, and people are displaced. But I'm trying to understand. I know it was from the master plan. I'm trying to understand how they came to the conclusion there's going to be like, I forgot how many hundred of families would want to move into the light industrial area off of 9 Mile, you know, or $300,000 homes right off of 8 Mile on a former brownfield. You know, I'm building these things hopefully means that there's people are going to want these homes. And I'm just wondering how the people that put the master plan together came up with those numbers for these areas. Okay.
Yeah, that's a great question, Al. In you could speak to the Gibbs Group study a little bit, whether or not anyone's going to buy a $300,000 house on a former brownfield site is a head scratcher to me as well.
Right.
But,
I can,
but
sure, I can
yeah,
definitely
in
speak
terms
to that.
of the industrial area and the downtown area, there was an outside group that did that study, Gibbs Planning Group.
Right. I'll go back to the number. I mean, I'm not going to recite these numbers and snow you all again, but just for the sake of conversation. So it is a great question. I mean, so Gibbs Planning Group is a planning firm, and they basically looked at projections. And so you look at, and I'll just opine on myself. There's some science to it, and I'll be charitable and call some of it art. In terms of how these numbers get come up with, I mean, they're looking at economic conditions, they're looking at what's happening around, and there's a lot of anecdotal kind of when in doubt, look about that goes on in the industry. I've gone, as part of my role, I try to get out in the scene and go to these different conferences and workshops where these, developers are having these discussions, and you look sort of what's going on in the metro area. I think we're really only second in Metro Detroit to Detroit in terms of like housing units under construction. I think Rochester comes close. I think Birmingham may come close, especially with some of the newer projects, but we're basically right up there. And sort of that reality has kind of played out. In terms of the only areas that were projected for was sort of that downtown space, and then the industrial area, that sort of Wolcott zone, the Hilton, that kind of corridor anchored there. So I apologize, I can't off the top of my head speak to their methodology. I kind of spoke to my perception of their methodology, but it has been kind of backed up sort of by the interest in terms of what's discussed, and certainly, I cash my checks when they're in writing, when the money's in the bank, and so on. In the same spirit, these units, it's easy to talk and put a nice rendering together, but it's a lot harder to get the financing lined up. And I will say anecdotally, I've been approached by banks, and I've been asked for, introductions to these developers because they want to make the loans. They believe these will sell. I talked to somebody, there was a networking event right before this over at the corner that the chamber put on. There was a Huntington loan officer there that said, we're very, that they want a piece of that action is basically how they look at it. Now, everybody's bullish now. If something happens to the economy, it could flip. I mean, I think there's a lot of that goes on. I think in general, what I have seen, and just in my professional opinion, to an extent, some of it is real here in Ferndale. I mean, you can see that by things going vertical and people seeing the confidence in the market, people investing in businesses and things like that. So Ferndale is a desirable area. There is interest here, and people are investing real money into these projects. And it's one of those things that we're watching very closely in terms of the conversations about affordability and about density. All these things are sort of interrelated. And I think what you're seeing is, and I apologize, I don't mean to drone on, but one of the things, it is a fascinating thing that we look at in the department is when you're looking at these projects, and especially on the city side, whenever it's a PUD or incentives or city land, that's when we have the opportunity. Those are my three favorite things to deal with because we actually have leverage to affect the outcome beyond our ordinance. And some of the things that affect kind of how this all shakes out is density and parking requirements and ordinance requirements and building standards. All of those sort of play into that final price point. Now, frankly, we could probably use some developers that don't need to have everything have granite countertops and fancy finishes. I think that plays into it as well. But certainly the trade-offs, and it kind of, on face value at least, it played out on the Taft site, for example. That started out, they had a proposal, 104 units. And so there was a trade-off conversation. There was that density let them, offer these up at $150,000 a unit. And reducing it to 72, which we kind of all sort of on all sides of the dais, the public, the staff, kind of landed on that as a compromise point. Well, if there's going to be an increase in density, this is relatively healthy given what we get out of the project. That brought those prices up to, because they essentially spread the same costs. Now, that being said, you can look at the Livernois condos as an example where, maybe you can start at an affordable range, but at the end of the day, and even the Robertson brothers conceded to this, is they'll sell for what they sell for. My understanding is, I didn't make him show me the papers, but the gentleman who developed the Livernois condos said he sold the first one for $275,000, sold the last one for over $400,000. So, right. So, these are real sales. I kind of track anecdotally housing sales that happen. Last quarter, I want to say in June, I saw one house stuck out to me. It was a house on Withington sold for about $423,000. So that was an existing house on Withington. And we have great housing stock here. So one of the things that we're doing to address that, and I'll just kind of close out unless there's other questions, but in addition to the inclusive housing ordinance, one of the things that CED believes strongly, and we've worked with council on this, we want to work with the commission on this, continue to do so, is that there's more to do. And you can look at like Grand Rapids, their Housing Now initiative. They have a very robust sort of, it doesn't stop at new unit set-asides. There's, individual wealth building. There's preservation of existing housing. You look at like the southeast corner of the city, for example, Wanda to West End, 9 Mile to 8 Mile. That's 11.9% unemployment relative to like 4% county and statewide. The incomes are $36,000 a year. It's like roughly half of the rest of the city, which is crazy because we're 4 square miles. And that plays into it as well. I mean, there's really no bad area of Ferndale. I mean, even, you look at the medical marijuana conversation, the stigma of being stuffed in the industrial area, our M1 district is pretty sweet. And it's pretty walkable, and there's really unique businesses there, and there's opportunities. So there's not really a bad zone in Ferndale. And so that, I think, is what explains this demand in what you might call an industrial area. And so that's, in a lot of ways, this master plan has been kind of racing and screaming to life at us. And this effort has been, okay, how do we manage these trade-offs every time? So in CED in particular, we're using incentives as basically our primary lever to affect those outcomes.
I think that's a great point, that we were way ahead of the curve when it came to transit-oriented development and wanting to see things go higher in the downtown, wanting to reuse and redevelop sites, and for over a decade there was no demand for a lot of reasons. So now it has arrived, and we are working to manage it, and it's one of the reasons we just, again, updated that downtown zoning, is that we saw what happened with the first couple, and we said, nope, there need to be some changes in how this continues to go forward. So,
absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, last one. And then we got to go. Come on, Janet.
Through the chair, just for a quick clarification, too, to what your original question was. When they do the market study, they're trying to determine how many residential units they think there's going to be a demand for in general in the city. But that isn't, there's really no, they're not studying what the price will be. That's all completely driven by the market. So there isn't any decision as to what price point these units are going to be built at. It's just more of a guess of how many people do we think are going to want to move into a new unit of some kind in the city.
And Jordan will make sure that study is online. It might be appended to the master plan, but he can put it more clearly online.
Well, in regard to that, could the city consider, and I know cities have considered, having a moratorium until we see how what we're currently involved with plays out before just going ahead and approving every developer's request that comes before us as a city? We don't have to keep growing as a city, and we maybe need to slow down a little to see how things settle out. In addition, back to the Pinecrest Holdings development, what's the status of the development that they're currently involved with on 10 Mile, the old Walker Wire site? How far along are they? And
they're involved in a lot more than just that one. A lot
well,
more.
And then maybe they're involved in too many all at once. Why don't we wait until we see how their initial developments play out before approving additional developments for this same company? And in line with that, I had reassurances at one of the meetings about sewer and water availability and our ability as a city to make that available to new development. But we know we have sewer and water issues county and statewide, and it doesn't sound to me that we're really addressing those issues. We already have overcapacity of the Coon Drain, which used to be the 12 Towns Drain. And I think we really need to consider those environmental issues and health issues if we can't provide adequate water and sewer.
Thanks, Janet.
Thank you.
Yep. In terms of the requirements for stormwater as well as sewer retention, detention, all of that, all of the sites, if anything, a number of our older sites are being brought into better compliance than they were before because they often had zero retention or detention on their sites.
Still all combined.
This might be a sidebar conversation.
It is, but just so every new development, they have to do a separated system. So even though we are combined as a community, every new development has a separate sewage line with a separate storm line.
Well, that's fine, but we don't ourselves.
For sure.
All flow
Right. Right. Yeah. And it's a bigger, like, regional issue versus just a Ferndale issue.
And plus the issue of our industrial sewage being combined with our residential, that's a hazard, and that
Thank you. All right. Any final questions or comments?
You know, just very quickly, through the chair, just on touching on the issue of a moratorium, once you start to restrict what people can do with private property, especially when those restrictions haven't existed in the past, one thing that happens there is you start to see a lot of litigation, and you start to see it come very quickly. If the city were to try to tell everyone, starting from this date forward, you can no longer exercise the same rights over your private property that everyone else in the city has been able to exercise in years past, the city is going to end up buried in litigation, and the city is probably going to end up losing most of those lawsuits, and that would be an extreme cost to taxpayers. So trying to initiate something like a moratorium, Dan Chris could probably speak to this a little bit better than I could, but I just, as an attorney myself, I just don't see that could be in any way possible.
All right. We shall adjourn at 8:33. Thank you.
Thank you.